Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Tasha Arnold. Just call me Tasha. My students often call me Dr. Tasha, which I think is really cute. But I'm the executive director of the Interchange Institute, and I'm also head of schools for Alpha schools around the United States. And we're sending a group of students for a year abroad. They're going to be launching schools in Kenya and Ecuador. And as I was prepping we call them guides instead of teachers, as I was prepping the guides, and I said, okay, this summer you're doing a lot of planning. But what are you going to do for rest prior to spending every day, every night with children for basically, 11 months of the next year? And I also felt a little bit like a phony because I can't remember the last time I've had rest myself. So it kind of that's what that's what brought this topic up. And so I wanted to ask you all, when did you last take a real break? And I'm not talking, you're on vacation and you checked your email, or a weekend when you caught up on those tasks, but a real, genuine, nothing to prove rest. Can you think of when that last was? So, and I'm going to ask my team. So, Zdenka and Peter, if you guys can also just be checking in on the chat box as well and let me know if there's anything to bring out. But so, in much of Europe and North America, August used to be this untouchable sort of time frame, this untouchable month. And when I lived in Europe, I quickly found that, in the month of August, you're not going to get much business done. Offices are closed, phones are quiet, and it wasn't even necessarily a personal choice. It was a cultural norm that was protected by everyone at the same time. But I would also say that norm was eroded without anyone consciously deciding to end it, right? So we have now smartphones, global teams, we're always on various different platforms. And rest went away from this sort of luxury, or went away from the norm to a real luxury. Oh, you have time off. And for maybe to many of us in this room, it may feel vaguely irresponsible to take such a significant period of time off. So, what we're going to discuss and look at today is what the brain actually needs. So, we'll talk about a little bit with regards to the learning science, what just, a few cultures have to teach us about rest. And I'm also wondering, should we fight to bring it back, this idea of a month-long rest or even a significant period of time that we rest? So, the learning science of rest. So, during sleep and unstructured downtimes, the brain's default mode is to go into rest, right? So when it's our brain is active when you're not focused on a task, actually. It has processes, it consolidates new experiences into long-term memory. So without rest, our brain is not able to do that. So you experience things, but you don't absorb them if you're not resting. And this matters, enormously to any of us that work in learning and development because we need to be mindful that our learners need to pause in order to, take in as much content and information as possible. So if you're familiar with Stick Golden Walker's Pomodoro principle, and actually their principle is the ultradian rhythm. But Francisco Cirillo's Pomodoro technique. Do any of you use this in your work? Raise your hand if you're familiar with it. So essentially what it is, it's this 25 minute, focused work, 5 minutes off. And it wasn't invented from scratch. It mirrors, arguably, it's argued that it mirrors a biological reality. So Nathan Kleppman, he's the one who discovered REM sleep. He also identified this basic rest activity cycle, which is this 90-minute ultradian rhythm of cognitive arousal and then followed by this natural need for recovery. And you see sports science utilizes this idea. Academics use this as well, but we fight this. And it's argued that it cost us more by fighting this than actually just honoring this technique of, a burst of focus and then some rest. So the Pomodoro method is popular because it works with the brain's natural rhythm, not against it. But as you probably know, most workplaces aren't designed to sort of elevate this sort of rhythm, or it doesn't even exist. Could you imagine, if you work in not at home or for yourself, could you imagine in the workplace saying, no, I need 25 minutes of focused and now I'm going to take a 5 minute break, 25 minutes focus, 5 minute break. I'd be interested to put in the chat if you have worked in an environment where that was something that was celebrated. So there's this other idea that longer breaks restore deeper capacity. So Kaplan, Stephen and Rachel, they have this restoration theory, and this dates back to the late 80s, and it distinguishes between this idea of direct attention, so focused, effortful kind that you use at work, and involuntary attention. So that's activated by, nature and beauty. It's more of an unstructured exploration. So directed attention is a depletable resource. That's, been proven. And only genuinely restorative environments, which that means being away from something, being in a state of fascination or compatibility, being able to remove yourself from it is a way to replenish it. So when you go on a busy vacation, that's actually not a rest. That's not a way to replenish and refuel yourself. So, think about the last packed itinerary holiday vacation you were on and you came back and you felt tired. And that's because your attention was directed the whole time. The real restoration that I'm talking about, it requires something different, and it takes longer than just a weekend to fully replenish. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the science is clear. Micro breaks are helping us, right? But they don't substitute for this macro rest, and your brain needs both. And most of us, I would suspect, are chronically under delivering on that macro rest. So here we have up on the screen, I just picked a couple of cultures, and I'm sure you guys could add even more to this. But France, Southern Europe, the grandes vacances. I know there's lots of French speakers here, so maybe you could say it better than I can. But it wasn't just this personal choice; it was socially enforced. Showing up to work in the month of August could be embarrassing. And so this collective nature of everyone being on board, that's what made the month of August, that rest month, sort of the norm, and everyone stopped at once. And even to this day in France, I don't know if it's universal across the country, but I know in the large majority of France, if you send an email after 5 p.m., unless it's some sort of emergency, you could actually get fined for infringing on someone's personal time. So I think, the French have taken it even to that next level of that daily micro sort of rest as well. In Scandinavia, this idea of summer freedom is still culturally real. So they're still, really celebrating and implementing this for the most part. And summer freedom really is out of office. And out of office means out of office. So this is a cultural boundary that, again, has been largely held. And I think it's worth asking why others haven't done this, why we haven't sort of maybe come up with a term or within our calendar really had a significant sort of identity for what that freedom might look like, whether it's in the summer or your winter, could be different. The US and the global north, in particular in the US, there's no federally mandated paid leave. So the average American actually takes less than half of their vacation days that they're allocated. And oftentimes, when you start at a new job, maybe you're giving 2 weeks of vacation a year. And then over a period of time, you might accrue some more. So it's not the typical, UK 6 weeks vacation that you oftentimes start with. And in the US, it's this hustle culture. We brand busyness as a virtue. And if you're resting, maybe you're a little bit lazy. Maybe you're a little bit lazy, or you're lacking some ambition. So that's the sort of cultural norm that you're looking at in the U.S. Japan, karoshi is a term that means death from overwork, and it is a legally and medically recognized cause of death in Japan that can be on a death certificate. And this is where, when there's an absence of rest, as you can imagine, it results in fatal consequences. And so I think, we know the sort of mental impacts, we know the work improvement that these breaks can have. But it's also, I think, even worth sitting and thinking, for a moment about how this overworkness is causing death, and it's acknowledged in some cultures. So here's what I want to say to you. We have the science, we have some of the cultural evidence that rest can be protected when a society chooses to protect it, right? So calling all interculturalists here and educators and those of us that are interested in learning about cultural norms for a living, should we be campaigning to bring back the real break, right? So the case for it, brain science backs it up. There's that whole that we talked about, the consolidation, restoring, needing this genuine downtime to be at your best, so to speak. Interculturalists model what they teach. If we preach well-being and, being able to, transition well into a new culture and being well rested, is this something we should be thinking about as interculturalists in our practice? Children, they learn from our rest norms from the adults. So, those of us that are educators, what are we portraying to our students and saying that, what is important to them? What should they be prioritizing? And, as we saw, cultural shifts can be, our cultural norms can be shifted. August used to be protected for the most part, and so we can protect it again. The other side, right, is, if you're working in global teams or working with people around the world, there's not necessarily a shared August. Someone is always on. So you're in France, but you're working with Americans or you're working with Australians, and that month of August isn't off. So what does that mean for you and your business? Not everyone can afford to stop, right? Rest is a privilege that many people don't actually have. The always on economy is restructured expectations at every level, right? So what that means for you personally, professionally, as a community, and just choosing to incorporate this long duration, this macro level of rest isn't enough, right? You have to have big change at the higher level. So went through that pretty quickly because I want to give you guys some time to discuss in groups. These are some personal questions, so you don't necessarily have to answer them, of course, in your groups and share. I just want you to be honest where you actually are. So, the first question, and I originally had each breakout room kind of focusing on a question, but I think, feel free to pull from any of these four. But what does rest look like in your cultural background? And how has that shaped the way you work and recover? What did you inherit? What did you change? So, what did rest look like in your childhood home? What happened on a Sunday afternoon? Was there siesta? Were you a family that never stopped? What does that look like? What did that look like? The Pomodoro and the long breaks. So short breaks help. I think we all can agree with that. But does the brain also need a month-long pause? What's the difference between this micro and macro rest? And have you experienced both? So those are some points of discussion you can talk about. If any of you have taken a genuine long break, so I'm thinking sabbatical, parental leave, redundancy, what did you notice about when you were off, about how you felt, or, did you act differently? How did you process things differently, or did you jump right back to the fast-paced, um, thinking and moving lifestyle? The privilege of loss. So who gets to rest? Is advocating for a rest culture naive, right? And if no one has access, if everyone doesn't have access to it, what is that? What is it? What are we saying? And how does it land differently across cultures, class, and professions? So you can pull some examples from your own work and your own experiences. If this seems too sort of abstract in a way, think about three people who won't, or couldn't take a real break this summer. Or if you're in your winter hemisphere, think of the previous summer. What's the actual barrier for each of them? Is it the same barrier for each person who was unable to take a break? And then, bring back August, right? Is it realistic or even desirable for us to campaign for a, cultural shared pause? And what would it actually take? And what would be lost, right? Because if you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So what would be lost? Okay, so these are some questions we want you guys to have a look at. And we'll put you into some breakout rooms. And we'll give you a good chunk of time, and then we'll come back the last 10 minutes and we'll have a little discussion. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Look forward to hearing what was discussed in the breakout rooms. So, I would like to hear a surprising thing from each room. So, not a summary of what you talked about, but a moment. Maybe something that shifted your thinking or something the group couldn't agree on. Why don't we? I'll open it up there. Share what's a moment that happened in the breakout rooms that you'd like to share. Go ahead,
Jane
Doreen.
Jane shared that in Korea, women get 2 years of maternity leave.
Wow.
And Joy shared that all the vacations they get when there's a vacation, a holiday on a Wednesday, then they automatically take Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which just tickled my heart because there's dozens of them. I want to move to one of those countries.
Yeah, right. It's definitely a factor, or can be a factor. What
Maybe,
else? What's another moment?
maybe to piggyback on that, in Germany, 30 days of paid vacation is normal, but at least 23, I believe, 23 days of paid vacation is mandatory, legally mandatory. No company can escape it. Just to piggyback on what's normal in Korea, and yeah, paternity leave is, I think it's 3 years, and it can be shared between the partners.
Yeah, I believe that's across most of Scandinavia, correct? For those of you who have that knowledge. Hannah.
Yes, we moments that, and it was a really wonderful conversation. A moment we talked about was the difference of the motivation of, I think it's the Hofstede line with Culture Wizard, live to work or work to live. So where your values are and taking that break, where that lands among that line, because in fact, in our chat, we talked about how much we love what we do. And Michael, and his age is going strong, doing this work, and doesn't look in isn't in retiring immediately. So, what kind of breaks do we need in those senses when you love what you do?
Yeah.
Certainly for me growing up in England, uh, the idea of taking the month of August off was a very much a class related thing. I think if your parent or your parents were like doctors or solicitors, lawyers, more military respected positions, those families would go away to a holiday cottage or a family home or somewhere for the whole month of August, and then kind of leave the rest of us behind. Um, so yeah, certainly growing up, the idea of being able to take your whole family away for 4 weeks in the summer was very much an alien concept.
Yeah. I could see that for sure. Patricia.
Thank you. I was in an amazing room. I don't know if you guys fixed it with Joyce, Sylvia, Roulade, and Alan. What we had in common is that I think somehow we found a way to split our time between continents so that we have the quality time we grew up with. Alan just moved back to the US, and I can sense that there'll be culture shock for him. But so I love that. And then somehow, what was surprising, so, Tasha, you asked the question, we ended up talking about the World Cup, and how definitely some people took time to, to watch it and to balance it up. It looks like all of us have um, mastered the art of working with our calendars to work hard and play hard. So that's my point here. So thank you for the World Cup talk, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, no, I think and I was having this conversation about this chat with a colleague, and I brought up working hard and playing hard, and he's like, "But you just said the learning science says that playing hard is not restorative," and I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's a good point." So I myself am trying to find some, time where you're just kind of disconnecting completely, but definitely enjoyed being in New York area with the World Cup going on. There was definitely a buzz and
Mm.
vibe. So we did try to make time for that as well. Anyone else? Anything that, a moment that was interesting to you or perhaps has caused you to reflect on even further, or anything in general that you want to add?
Just let me put on my camera. This is just an observation I made that regardless of wherever in the world we are, the desire for rest remains the same. However, the conditions that we might be able to obtain that rest vary, as well as the desire to balance work-life responsibilities again remains similar. But again, the opportunities to ensure that balance are different, vary. So again, we are all the same. Thanks again.
Yeah, definitely. That was something that kept coming up. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Please jump in.
Joy, I'm going to say something I adopted from the Trinidadian culture. They don't necessarily wait to have vacation. They have a concept of getting together just because called liming. I have adopted it, Joy, and I love it. Just liming, just show up. Let's just get together. So why wait on the vacation?
Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. Well, let me ask this question as well. What's one thing you're genuinely going to give yourself permission to let go of this summer, or depending on what hemisphere you're in, your winter, this next couple months? I'm letting go of the guilt about not publishing my book. I'm letting go of being reachable at all times. Anybody willing to share something that they're thinking about letting go for the next period of time?
Well, maybe we should learn how to let go all week long, all month long, all year long. I think if we're able to build these breaks into our life and schedule fun time or relaxation time, just like we schedule meetings, I think the need for such a long restorative break is no longer necessary. And also, just one quick word about summer. Well, we all believe summer is something different because I live in South Florida, and for me, summer is not exactly the time when I take time off because I stay at home. I hope my air conditioning doesn't break down. So, fingers crossed, all goes well this horrible summer. But as soon as winter comes, this is when it's playtime in a hot place like this. And so, this is the time to take time off to go outside. So, summer doesn't mean the same thing to all of us, neither does rest.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So building in that rest around whatever season makes sense for you, for wherever you're at in the world. Absolutely. Doreen, you were going to add something.
As one of the white-haired people in our third chapter in the room here, I do think that there's a very serious generational perspective that is happening throughout all of our cultures, and that is the number of more elderly people who are finding that they have to work longer or they have to be in the workforce for a bit longer, or they retire. And I call it rewirement, not retirement, because I'm busier now than I ever was, but it's with things of my own choice. So there's quite a lot of privilege built into this. And I think with that privilege, sometimes it becomes almost an entitlement. It goes a bit overboard. So I think that's something we have to recognize that generationally, and when you're elderly, you do need more time to recover from everything. It becomes not a choice to recover, but a necessity because the body is demanding it. And so I'm just sort of paying attention to, as I go through my aging process, becoming more aware and articulating that to other generations because as they go through it, they will probably face something very similar.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Doreen. I think that's something for us all to continue to reflect on. And, lots today, I think, are going to sit with me over the next few months as Renata pointed out, start thinking about scheduling these sorts of breaks. I totally agree. I'm doing that now myself on Sundays, really securing some time to just be. And whatever that being looks like for that day depends on the mood that I'm in and what I want to do. But, we meet every other Wednesday. And, you know, the reason why we all get together is because we're thinking about, and you guys already alluded to this, about what connects us across difference and across cultures. And so the next couple of months, you know, maybe rest is the practice that you reflect on. And in the meantime, we'll see you in September. And, you know, check out the recordings and the podcast in the meantime. And we look forward to seeing everybody again. We really, really enjoy this group, and it's really a privilege for us to get together. So thank you for being a part of it.